Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Committee of the Whole meeting of the Superior Board of Education. This meeting is a meeting of the Board of Education held in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There's a time for comments by members of the public during the meeting as indicated on the agenda. Members of the public wishing to address the board on any topics included on tonight's agenda may do so by signing up on the public comment sign-up sheet by the entrance prior to the start of the meeting. Board requests refraining from making any comments involving personally identifiable information about students, staff, or administration. Comments should be respectful, focused on the items being considered by the board, and will be restricted to 3 minutes in length. This time I'd like to call this meeting to order. We have met compliance with official notification. Roll call, please.
Brooke Taylor.
Here.
Diana Smith.
Here.
Nick Olson. Here. Nick Schumacher.
Here.
I'm here. President Olson.
Here. Do you have any comments by the public, Ann? We do not. And we shall move to our report of our superintendent.
All right, I have two informational items tonight. First up, we have Mr. Flaherty with an update from Lake Superior Elementary School.
Be the fastest update you have. All right.
Oh, Rick.
What are you gonna do?
I know, what am I gonna do? I know.
Some celebrations. I did want to celebrate some things going on and thinking about Lake Superior. Knowing that it is going to close at the end of the year. Our biggest celebration is people remain they remain committed to the kids and focused. And you wouldn't know, there's not a sense of at least outwardly of some real dread and such, and it could be a lot different. And that is something that we do need to celebrate. The kids are engaged. They are staying active. We've got great participation with our community, our family, our parents, and that truly is a celebration. We've got weekly things going on through the end of the school year. The PTO has, they ramp them up once we get into April and May, and we'll have some fun with that. And there'll be some times when it gets a little bit tougher, but you wouldn't know it right now, and that certainly is something that we should celebrate. There are plans in place. We're still focusing on moving our kids. We want to see all of our kids moved out of that high risk category in reading and math. We've got some work to do. We aren't there yet, but we've had some great conversations. The teachers worked hard on our last in-service time, and we hope that our spring data gets to the place where we have all the kids achieving where we want to. And if we don't, we're continuing to move, and they're going to grow regardless. Another celebration. I feel guilty sometimes, but man, there's no issues at that building as far as behavior. The other day, I had 2 kids in my office at the same time. That was the most I'd had all year. So that was kind of fun. But it is fun, and that is certainly a celebration. I threw in just a few pictures. That was the first day of school. We are planning some photos and such towards the end, so we'll have a last day at Lake Superior also, and I'm sure that will involve a lot more. That will be a little more somber than that first day, but it'll still be a celebration. Some kids recently. It's always good to have those faces. And just realized Stephanie Smetic, if you haven't worked with Stephanie, she is a hoot, and it's just a wonderful person. I mean, you just see the expression, but that's just common. And she's a snappy dresser, and she does a really, really nice job at the school with us. This was a night we had a community event. And I threw this one in. We had every single table. We were filling up the place. People are still showing up. We were playing bingo and such, and just having a family night. And the point is that people are still very committed and having a good time. So just a few pictures I threw in. Challenges, we're like anyone else. There's some attendance issues that we continue to work with. Some of them, I don't think it's the kids and I don't think it's the families necessarily, their fault, but there's some challenges in getting kids to school and, there's that's a big piece and something that will always be a challenge for any school. So I think that's one of our biggest things. And we've lost a few kids this year, even in our little building, and that makes a big difference. The stress level there is, I mentioned that you wouldn't know it and people aren't talking about it necessarily, but there is a stress level and people not knowing for sure what to expect and where they're going to end up. Support staff and teaching staff. And we're getting there and we'll work through these things, but
And Molly and I have come out
Yep,
almost once a
yep.
month to meet with support staff and teachers just to
Yep.
give them more information as we
Yep.
know it.
and that's been appreciated. So to their credit, we keep working through that. We will keep preparing and partnering. Our teachers are working hard, in that small building. We don't have grade level collaboration necessarily, but we have teams of teachers that are coming together to look at student data, to come up with plans to support kids, and just making good plans moving forward. There you go. Short and sweet. Any questions?
Thanks, Rick.
No. Yep. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you. All right. Do we have any papers?
Food on the grill.
Aaron's got his jacket on too,
Yeah.
so.
That's middle school, Mr. Levers. You have a bunch of staff who can help you present. to me.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will.
Well, she will be, yeah.
You get your turn. Just a quick update from what we talked about back in the fall in October. These are the things that we've been focusing on. I included these as part of our challenges slide. But if you recall, we talked a lot about attendance back in the fall, our test scores, and then a big thing for us is making connections with our kids and with the community. So that's been a big focus of ours right here at the middle school. So I'm just jumping right into data. I didn't put a lot of pretty pictures in. I apologize, but I'm kind of a numbers guy and I want to stick to what we have. So you asked me a lot of questions back in the fall about our attendance rates and we've done a lot of work this year. And our goal is to decrease the chronic student truancy. We were at 41.5% last year, which is terrible. And big focus of ours this year. We got teams working on this. Our APs and counselors and our teachers are all working diligently on connecting with their families and making sure the kids understand, making sure the families understand that we gotta get to school every day. Currently, and this is a huge celebration. 12% of our kids right now are chronically truant as compared to last year at 41.5%. So
That's amazing.
that's huge. Really proud of the effort that's gone into this. We are communicating like crazy with families. If we get close to that 10, and that's what we're talking about, 10 absences. We get close to that, we're reaching out, meeting with families, trying to solve those barriers to get these kids to school. A lot of work goes into this.
There's a lot of positive emails going out as well from staff and it's intentional and it's noticeable.
It's making a big difference.
Mhm.
Our next goal in our CIP this year, 90% of the SMS students will make modest, typical, or aggressive growth on the ELA FAST bridge. Currently, we're at 79% of our kids have met this goal. That's a really good achievement as well. I put a slide in here too to show some of the growth from fall to winter on the reading FAST bridge, and we've seen some pretty good gains. So the gains might not, the points there for gains may not mean a whole lot to you, but the national average from fall to spring is like 3.5, 4 points. So we're moving right along. Our kids are showing some growth on our.
When is that spring testing then, Aaron?
May.
When is the spring testing?
May, yeah. We'll get through Ford exam. So really proud of the work that's gone into that and some of those celebrations that lead to those two goals. We had a Spartan Start this year where our kids can have a soft landing in like a homeroom setting, but it's for a full hour. We can jump up or bump up those literacy strategies in there that we do our SEL work. But most importantly to me is it's a great opportunity for our kids to connect with their teachers during that Spartan Start. We started reading and math interventions, which is crucial to improving our outcomes for our kids. Intramurals is another really huge celebration. Over a third of our kids have participated in our intramurals this year. So that's over 300 students. That's really nice. And then of course our attendance rates have improved tremendously. And then just the community involvement. We've got a lot of organizations that have donated and supported us this year. And I'm really blown away by the amount of support that the middle school's gotten this year and hope that continues. So I put some of those folks in on this slide. So, we've got conferences tomorrow night, SWLP, Superior Water Light Power is donating to help us with that. PTSA, we've got a lot of people that have really chipped in and donated to the middle school this year. And I know they've donated to the district as well, but Synovus made a huge donation to help us out with our clothing closet and these other folks that have helped out with feeding our staff during conference nights and things like that. So we're really pleased with our community. I think it's kind of it.
Do you think there's a correlation with the intramural, and the attendance? Is there,
I think so.
Covered to it, but.
Yeah, I think it's all of those components that we've really focused on. Our staff
Still connected. Yeah.
Our staff are communicating with families. We have that Spartan Start, so the kids feel connected to the school, the intramurals. There's a lot of opportunities for 12, 13, 14-year-old students that need something to do.
And there's a Boys and Girls Club after school too. That's there.
Club after school.
I was there today. The vibe was really positive. It was really good.
It was a good day.
Mhm.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. Great. We have one action item. Overnight field trip. Did you want to, you want to put that on the screen?
So one action item, consideration of overnight field trip for the Northland Senior Retreat.
Motion to approve it.
Second. Motion and a second to approve the overnight field trip for the Northland Senior Retreat. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And you have no discussion items, so we shall move on to the committee agendas. First up is Nick Olson with the Budget and Insurance Committee.
First off, we have a presentation from Baird.
So I have Debbie Burnett from Baird is coming. Everybody knows we're in a really budget crunch right now. So we can reduce expenses to get a balanced budget. But when you balance a budget, there's two ways to do it. There's reducing expenses or increasing your revenue. In the state of Wisconsin, a school district just can't go and get more money. It has to go through an operational referendum and increase the money over what they provide on the revenue limit worksheet. So I have Debbie here. She's going to go over it. But one thing I really want to emphasize is the reason that we're having this discussion, the reason that we're in the situation we're in is not because we're fiscally irresponsible. It's actually because we are fiscally responsible and have been fiscally responsible. If we were fiscally irresponsible, we would be like the other 80+% of school districts that have already done this. We're part of that 20% that's saved and saved and saved. But anytime you're saving and the money that the state is providing doesn't go up, there's eventually a tipping point, a breaking point. We're at that point right now, and everybody's feeling the cuts that we're working through right now. I wanted to start the discussion, and I know some people went to the conference down in Milwaukee and were able to sit in it and hear the information. So I brought Debbie in so we can discuss it more. Highly encourage ask her questions. She is the expert in operational referendums for the state. When it gets down to the detail on our school side, it's something that I might interject and talk about, but ask questions. Also, at the end, she's gonna go over our defeasance payment. That's something that we have to do, or we do every year when we levy early. So that we need to make that payment, and I believe the option we have up there is gonna save about $900,000 for the district over the life of that, so.
I was gonna say something and I forgot what. I'll remember later. Oh, I know, I was gonna say, we've been working through the budget process for a number of years. And we are really the only strategy we've used is cutting. And so we felt an obligation to bring more information to the board to understand how we do look at potentially increasing revenue as opposed to just decreasing our expenses. So we want to make sure the board has all that information. That's what I want to say. Yeah, so with that.
Welcome, Debbie.
Good evening. It's good to be back. For those of you who were here during the facility referendum, I had the opportunity and meet with you then, so I'm excited to be back. My clerk also says hello as well. So I'm here tonight to talk about the basics of operating. And this will be a starting point for you. The information you'll hear tonight, it won't be the last time you've heard it. Really, the goal is to build your capacity so that as you talk going forward, everyone has similar baseline information and it creates a foundation for those future discussions. So just to review, as Dave said, we are controlled, the majority of our revenue by the state revenue limit formula. That revenue limit formula is driven by our resident student count and the per pupil amount that we receive from the state. You are considered a low revenue district. And what that means is that the minimum, that 11,000 per pupil that they identified this year, you were able to come up to that. Last year you were below. So that minimum is where you are, and only because they increased the minimum. The state, when they created this formula back in 1993, they said, our goal is to control the tax levy. We're going to do it by controlling how much you have for operations. Going to be a majority of your revenue. And if it's not enough, you can go to referendum and ask for more. Nice, some statistics about the operational referendum history tying to you and other districts coming up. So I want to talk a little bit about these per pupil increases. Dave mentioned little to no increases. So this is the per pupil increases that have been provided via the biennial budget. The biennial budget each 2 years identifies if we get a revenue limit increase, how much, and if there are any other aids that come along with it. This visual identifies the increases that have occurred. There, you can see there are 3 years where it was 0 per pupil. That down bar isn't an error. It's actually a decrease, and surprised that label isn't coming through. It's supposed to say a negative 526 on there, which is your actual decrease. So in 11-12, the state actually decreased the per pupil by 5.5% for all districts statewide. And how that becomes relevant is it really took until 17-18 for your revenue limit per pupil amount to catch up to what it was prior to that decrease. And so that's important as we then fast forward. During that time, we know that utilities went up, insurances went up, salaries increased. And so that is part of the reason why we are talking about the deficit statewide that we are. The other factor is the ESSER funds retiring. So those dollars initially came to us as one-time funds to address needs. And in the biennial budget, the 21-23, where no increases were provided, the state came forward and said, we aren't going to provide an increase, use these one-time funds to do it. So now we've covered ongoing expenses with one-time funds, and it's compounded the issue statewide. So for many districts, and there's 66 districts going for a spring, whether it was February, which is already passed, or an April question just for operations, both recurring and non-recurring. And that is combined with, I pulled all of this for you, another 130 districts that already have authority. So between the district, and that's authority on this year's revenue limit worksheet, as we forecast it to next year. Actually, I pulled it from next year. So that means that if all of them were to pass, And we know those that are already in place, nearly 46% of districts across the state will have authority such as this. I have some additional maps later. So when we talk about referendum, there are really two types of referenda. And then of the second, there are subsets. So you can go to referendum for debt. And that's when you buy land, renovate buildings, build new buildings. So back in 16, I believe, you had a facilities referendum and you issue debt in order to finance those projects. We are not talking about that tonight. Tonight, we're talking about operational referendums. And those are classified in two types. We have non-recurring or recurring. So both of these increase your revenue limit authority, give you more to operate. It's the structure that differentiates. A non-recurring is for a set number of years. It can be 2 years. I had a district when I first started working at Baird. I'm in my 15th year, so a long time ago, it seems. They went every year. I do not recommend that because referendums are a lot of work. You could ask for 100 years. What's important is that there's a sunset to it. And when that sunset is done, those dollars go away. And if you want to replace them in whole or part, you need to go back to the community and ask. In this example, at the very bottom, we've used a 3-year example. You can do a flat amount, such as 900 each year, or in this example at the very bottom, we used 800 the first year, 900 the second, and $1 million the third. What's important about this one is in year 4, it goes away. The recurring, on the other hand, stays with you. So essentially those dollars get added to your revenue limit, becomes part of your per pupil amount. So let's imagine next year your per pupil amount is $11,325. Let's imagine you went for a recurring referendum. The year after, your per pupil amount could go up to $13,000 or $14,000. That's where that in perpetuity gets recognized. And it's still subject to the formula, so still multiply it by your FTE and carry it through. But in that case, that amount stays with you in the future. And we have an example of that, so you can kind of see the difference in numbers. That you can ask for a one-time amount, $1 million, and it stays with you ongoing, or you could ask for 800 the first year. Let's say we need 100,000 more the next year, 100,000 more the next year. So it totals $1 million by the end, and that carries through. So traditionally, operational referendums have had a high success rate throughout the state. You can see over 70%. The success rate wasn't as high in February. February hasn't historically had high passage rates. It doesn't have a lot of natural voter turnout because of what's on the ballot. We'll continue to monitor that as we go. We know the number of questions aren't decreasing.
Do you know when the best time to go to referendum is?
So historically speaking, that's a good question.
I know the answer. I just thought.
Yeah, we get asked this a lot. We track the data by election. Districts ask this a lot. Historically speaking, fall referendums have had the highest passage rate. Specifically, presidential elections in the fall have historically had the highest. And our speculation is because the most voters turn out. And so it's the greatest opportunity for everyone to share their vote.
Thanks.
So this is a visual representation of the two. And the reason why we're talking about the difference is it does have it impacts your planning differently. And it's one of the decisions the board will have to make if you choose to move forward with a referendum. And so we just want to be clear. So visual representation of non-recurring, you can see that it stays with you for 3 years. And then in this case, it goes away. So in year 4, that revenue would be gone. And the recurring on the right is the other example where it stays with you. So that base is increased and it continues going.
Do the recurring get readdressed at some future point, or is that, how does it?
Yeah, good question. It stays with you. And it does get readdressed in that we call it a longer term solution because they do continue, but we do not label it a permanent solution because it's possible that in the future you'll need to come back again. And then the new one would just layer on top if passed.
Gotcha.
And if you ask a recurring or a non-recurring one time, it does not prohibit you from asking or you can ask either one the next time you go. Great question. Explaining this okay so far? So you have never gone to operational referendum. You're one of the unique districts throughout the state. And this is your referendum history since 1993. You actually have a pretty quiet referendum history compared to a lot of districts we see. So you've been really working within your budget to do what you can, both on the operational side and fitting in many of your facility needs as well. We pulled some area school districts, and when I say area, we also tried to pick some like-sized districts to give you a better comparison. So this would be our northwest area of the state. I live in Eau Claire, so I consider this our area. And so you can see in the referenda type, this is where we would look at issuing debt. That's the kind that we aren't talking about tonight for facilities and maintenance and land purchases. And they're in there, anytime you see recurring referendum, that would be operations. And then there's a non-recurring question coming in Chippewa Falls this spring. So this is since 2018 for these larger districts. If we expanded it to the smaller districts that surrounded you, there would be more to include. And this map on the right demonstrates this. So these are districts who have passed an operational referendum and who have had it included on their revenue limit worksheet. So this wouldn't include our spring referendums if they were new. There are 6 districts this spring going to referendum for operations who have never asked before. On the left is a visual. I mean, if you attended WASB, and you would have seen this as well. This represents the number of districts where at least 10% of their revenue limit authority is made up of non-recurring operational referendum authority. And why we're tracking this and why we think this is a relevant data point is, remember, non-recurring has a sunset and the funds go away. So for 100 districts, if they go to referendum and it should not pass, they instantly lose 10% of their revenue limit authority, which means sizable budget concerns of some sort, whether it's a deficit budget or sizable reductions that they need to make. So we're continuing to monitor that. We thought maybe with the low revenue ceiling increase this year that it would slow the pace, and it actually increased much more than we thought. In reality, most would say recurring is a better long-term solution. Historically, non-recurring passed at a higher rate, which is why that was most often pursued. So there's a give and take to both. So we're going to talk a little bit about mill rate in a moment. And so I just want to recap your levy and get you to the mill rate. So I know this is review. I'll go quick. So our school levy is made up of up to 3 components in the state of Wisconsin, and you use all 3. Our revenue limit is that controlled part. So of our revenue limit authority, the state covers some, and then what's left goes to your local taxpayers. Community service levy, that's for our Fund 80 community service type activities, and then our referendum approved debt. So your scheduled payment is about 6.4 million right now for referendum approved debt. That's where we're going to talk about the prepayment for interest savings later on. And that's a levy that, because you've been planning, you can turn off that levy for debt if you go to operational referendum, so that you can turn it on for operations. And it can help soften that impact as you bring it on, if you should choose.
That's the bullet we've been saving. That's our last bullet to help if we're gonna go with an operational referendum, that we're able to cut down the excess. It's not a huge, you don't see that full amount. And the reason we do that is so you can strategically move your mill rate, and that we will show you our mill rate is really low. It has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Without early levying on the debt, that number would have really tanked, and then you'd see a huge uptick on when we go to operational referendum, a huge jump on the tax levy side and jump on the mill rates.
So the total school levy this year was a little over 21 million. the highest levy in the year past was over 22 million. So your levy this year, and that was back in 17-18 was the most recent high. So your levy this year is actually less than it was back in 17-18, which is a strong talking point for you because your tax base has grown. We know there's been inflationary growth, but we also know that there's been new growth as well during that time. So in general, many taxpayers should be paying less today than they did back in 17-18 in general, unless they did help projects to their homes or such in general. So when we get to our mill rate, how we get to our mill rate is we take that total levy, we divide it by our equalized value. This is our TID out value. The reason schools use equalized is because we overlay multiple municipalities. Fair market value is a synonymous term. So because municipalities assess at different levels, if we didn't use equalized value, could be distributing the levy unfairly. And we multiply it by 1,000 to get to our mill rate. So your mill rate this year was $6.24. And how we equate that to a home is for a $100,000 home, we just scoop the decimal 2 over, be $624 for the school taxes. If you had a $300,000 home, you could triple it or multiply it out specifically. Remember, this is just the school portion. There are other county, technical college, and municipalities all have levies on the tax bill. So like Dave mentioned, here's the mill rate history. And I think what's really important about this is not only is your mill rate going down, but your levy has also decreased from that 17-18. So 17-18 was your near past high in mill rate. It also was your near past high in levy. So if you did go to referendum, you would likely be bringing your levy or mill rate back up to levels that you were seeing just a few years ago.
Remember that 1068, that 960 futures.
When comparing again to like-sized general area districts, I like this slide because it's also very apples to apples. If we took a $100,000 home and it was placed in Menominee, they would pay on average $569 for school taxes. That same $100,000 home here would pay $624. The state average school district would pay $722. And Hudson and Rice Lake, being the highest in the comparable group, would pay $824. So you are below average in your comparable group and below the state average for a like valued home in terms of school taxes. And again, you can multiply that out by 3 or 4 to get a better comparable home if 100,000 isn't a right fit. Okay, so any questions on the basics of school finance? Have you on the edge of your seat? Okay, so we're about to dive into some scenarios. So again, our goal tonight is to get you thinking, build capacity between now and fall. Fall would be the next opportunity you would have to go to referendum if you wanted. Between now and fall, this is going to create a foundation for further conversation. So the numbers will change. You'll finalize this year's actuals that you're working through. You will set next year's budget. You'll have all that time, unless you chose an April referendum, which is unlikely. It's hard to communicate over the summer. You'd have all those additional data points to include to make the forecast most accurate if you move forward. But let's start with this base output. Is it okay?
Yep.
To go here for a second? I just want to point out a couple of lines really quick. So this is an output from our Baird model. We work with over half the districts in the state on forecasting operations. It's similar to what we're doing tonight for referendum planning, but just annual preparations as well. We have some key assumptions at the top. What it does is it flows through the model and it gives us an anticipated surplus deficit. This is the row that we're going to be watching as we run through a couple of scenarios. And because of the size of these numbers, that's why the topic of referendum has come up. So to address deficits like these, we have the choice to reduce expenditures, generate more revenue, or a combination. Many districts, when they start seeing dollar amounts this high, they want to give the community an opportunity to vote whether or not they want a referendum before making adjustments that would affect programming, such as adjustments like this might. So some of the assumptions based in this base output, 3% salary increases, 7 to 10% for health increases. There's some expense reductions in year one. Year one being 24, 25 next year, equivalent to about 3 million. And then another key factor is about $5 million in ESSER funds that are retiring this year that would not be reflected. So with the base model, as we would call it, or our base scenario, shows about a $1.5 million deficit. What that would do if this year ends up balanced like it's budgeted, it would bring the fund balance down to 24% for next year. And then because what would actually happen in real life if you didn't balance the budget and you let those deficits go, it would eat up your fund balance and eventually there would be any left. That's what the model shows. You would make adjustments to this to not allow that to happen. Or go to operational revenue.
Can I ask, what is like a healthy fund balance?
Good question.
Give me a percentage one time.
It's around 25 to 30% of kind of what you shoot for.
Okay.
We've been building it up really since the referendum. It was below that mark. And so we've been over the years building that up. We also were intentional about trying to build up our fund balance, knowing that the ESSER funds were going to be running out in an effort to kind of, I call it soften the blow of losing those dollars. And we've talked about that. So knowing that we could potentially deficit spend one time next year to help soften the blow with some of those reductions we have to make.
So the 1.4, when we look at it, that's a $5 million deficit. $500,000 of what's new from the state from next year from the 325 increase. And then we have the expenses that we're cutting, which is some operational and then on the personnel side. So that's where that number comes from, how you get down to that 1.4. So it's the 5 million loss plus you're adding in 500,000 and then the other expense cuts that we've been discussing.
And then the last row of this output that we'll be looking at is this mill rate. So oftentimes when we're talking referendum, the question is asked, what will this, how much exactly? And so this is the line where we are referencing. So we can see that in our base that our mill rate is staying in the approximate level we are now, within about $1.
And one more thing. Look at the top row and membership. You can only see why we're here as well. Because you've seen our membership from this year 40, 46, 28, 29, 34, 45. If you get revenue based on how many kids you have significantly less kids. That's where the revenue's going.
So then we ran through a few scenarios again, just to get you thinking. The first scenario, and all these scenarios acknowledge the fact that the deficit grows, which is pretty typical because when we have a deficit and then we compound it with the salary increases, benefits, utilities and such, it increases. So this one we came in and we said, what if we do a non-recurring for 4 years? And we do 4 million the first year, 5 million the second year, 6 million the third, and 7 million the fourth. And the reason why this amount was chosen was because it brought in about balanced here. You'll notice in the first couple of years in this example, it creates a surplus. That could be, you could lower these amounts, or you could use those funds on one-time things. It'd be really important not to create an ongoing cost with it because now it makes this look worse. But you could deposit into Fund 46 if you didn't have any immediate needs. You could pre-fund your Fund 73, keep that going. You could prepay your Fund 38 debt. You could address some maintenance projects that had needed to be tackled. So you would find uses for those. And then what's important is to see after the 4 years that 10 million is still there. That's that example of the non-recurring. Mill rate comes back to the same level that it was a few years ago throughout. And this is assuming 2% property value growth. Again, we know it's been much higher in the last couple of years specifically, but a lot of that has been inflationary. So we want to recognize the real growth so that we aren't overburdening our tax base. This is a similar scenario where we get up to 7 million, but on a recurring basis, starting with 4 million, add $1 million up to 5, add $1 million up to 6, add $1 million up to 7. And this shows you in numbers the impact of recurring instead. So instead of at the end forecasting a $10 million deficit, because that 7 million stays with you, it's forecasting 3 million instead. Similar mill rate impacts. It's not going to be dollar for dollar just because it factors people as part of the revenue limit calculation, if you're a quick mathematician. And then this is an example of a five-year non-recurring where you could continue to help address this, knowing that it would fall off the following year. So we could probably, well, no, we could run 100 different scenarios. We could run a flat amount, but the goal tonight was to really help you see some scenarios that could address it.
Can I ask a question? Is this assuming that nothing changes over those years? Like as far as staffing changes? I mean, if we're dropping that many students, obviously we would have to probably look at more cuts.
We'll be thinking about that 27, 28, and 500,000, because if we're losing that many students,
Right.
we need to make an adjustment.
Right.
So every year, we're going to be making adjustments if our student population changes.
So
That's,
this number though would be without changes made.
but I see the expenses are increasing each year, right?
Yep.
So why is that?
Expenses are increasing due to salaries, so if we want to, so all of these take into consideration at 3%, and I know when we did 3%, we did, the numbers that we're talking about when we do CPI. Remember, there's the steps in the CPI increases as well. Healthcare is the huge one, that's going up between 7 and 10% consistently every single year. Then you have your utilities don't stay flat, they go up. So there are going to be some inflationary expenses that are always increasing. So, but I wouldn't, it's gonna be us continuing to be fiscally responsible, and maybe it isn't cuts, it's attrition. This gives you the time where, hey, this person retired, all right, let's readjust. We don't have to do that now.
Which we've been doing.
Yeah.
And the last important point on this is if you do go to referendum, or when districts go to referendum, it's an up to this amount. So let's imagine that you do choose to go to referendum and it is approved. Each year, the board sets the levy. So let's imagine state variables come in better than expected, or you've made reductions to show that this amount isn't necessary. The board could just choose to levy less than what's allowed, and then the savings would be.
Gives them the authority to levy up to that amount.
You got it.
Yeah.
Yep. So any other questions or thoughts on that? And then I'm just going to end with a few next steps. Explaining, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very good.
So where to go from here? One of the questions is going to decide if you go and if you do start that planning process to choose when. So there are no fall elections in odd years, which is important because several years ago, the statutes changed. You used to be able to go to referendum on any date. And now you can only go on regular scheduled election dates unless there's a natural emergency, a natural disaster. And you can only ask 2 times per calendar year. So you could go in, districts are going in April for one question, and they may try again come fall if it doesn't pass. So those are kind of the 2 key backgrounds, and the board also has to approve it 70 days prior to the election date. So how you interpret this is here are the primaries. Here's when the board would need to approve it. So your next regular opportunity would be the fall. August is tricky because it's really hard to communicate with everyone over the summer with their summer plans and such. So districts don't tend to target August, but you can. The most typical one, we have a lot of districts during. So that would be your first opportunity. Interesting to note, if you do choose to go in the fall, you could actually have that money kick in next year. What happens is the board, because you have to approve the levy by November 1st, the election is after. Board would be asked to approve 2 budgets and set 2 levies. This is common. And then whatever the right answer is after the election, that's the one that gets forwarded and certified. You don't have to, but you could. And then the future election dates are noted here as well. So one of the first questions will be, are we going, and if so when? And then
No next steps.
I'm not showing.
Just tell us.
I will show you. You can make notes on your own imaginary slide.
I apologize for this. So, referendum decisions. So besides the date, the next bullet will be, recurring or non-recurring. So we talked a lot about the difference between those two decision. Oftentimes it impacts the amount you ask for too. The duration and type. So if you do non-recurring, how long will it last? Is it going to be flat, 4 million every year, or is it going to grow 4, 5, 6, 7? And then of course the amount. You will work with bond counsel on this. They help you draft the resolution. They make sure you're meeting all of the posting obligations. So you have your I's dotted and T's crossed from that aspect. And then of course there's the communication part, making sure that your community knows and has the information they need to vote.
And typically, school districts work with companies to help with some surveys. So you survey your community and you kind of find the sweet spot.
Mhm.
That's safe to say, like what's more likely to pass. And their predictions are pretty accurate as to whether your referendum will pass or not. So it's an important aspect, I think, of this process, right?
Yes.
Well, what's the, at least in my opinion, looking at a non-recurring is a horrible decision because you're just kind of slapped with a major deficit at the end of it anyhow. So why are districts going to non or trying?
Like, what's the benefit?
Yeah, what's the
Yeah.
benefit? Now, why are they? Are they just hoping that they're gonna redo it again?
Because it has a higher
Didn't you
success rate.
say, didn't you say they pass
Yeah.
more often?
Yeah, so most districts end up in what we call a recurring, non-recurring scenario. As soon as one non-recurring finishes, most are coming back and asking again.
For gambling that public will keep.
So one analogy I was given by somebody was that the thing was, it's to get it passed. And how can you get it passed? Hey, I don't want to tax you for the next 3 years. You okay with that? Sure. Hey, I don't want to tax you forever. So, I mean, in the business wise, absolutely, recurring is the way you want to go, because if that referendum doesn't pass on that, and that one, where we're looking at $10 million needs to be cut, probably 6 months to figure it out.
Yeah.
So.
The other aspect that I think is important in this conversation is not only are we bringing this idea about an operational referendum, but we also have capital expenses and facility. We have a roof on the middle school and a roof on the elementary school that does need to be considered. That's not part of our annual operating budget. And so we need to figure out when and how you would consider going to the public with that as well. And you can only ask 2 questions a year.
Yep.
It could be a capital and an operating, it could be 2 operational, it could be, but it's literally just 2 questions. So for example, in that one scenario in 2025, there's 1 opportunity,
Mhm.
right? And that's it. Whereas if you go, like those that go this spring have another opportunity this fall if it didn't pass, but they can only ask 2 questions.
What's the downside if you fail? That's some question wise.
Pardon, if you fail what?
If you fail the referendum twice a year, what's the downside?
The down there, so the easy answer is you have to figure out how to balance your budget
Right.
from an operational side. The current statutes, and it has been brought up multiple times, so we're hopeful that this gets removed. But current statutes, if you fail an operational referendum specifically, will freeze your low revenue ceiling for 3 years. So that's the potential downside. Now, you're still allowed the per pupil increases. So if the low revenue ceiling stays at 11,000 for 3 years, then you're not impacted. The danger would be if it didn't pass, we know next year is 11,000. So 1 year would be done, we would know. But then beyond that, if it went up to 12 or 13, you would only get the per pupil increase, which right now is scheduled at 325. So that is something right now, it was brought up and they were able to make concessions this year for those that failed. All but,
But it was like a one-time
Yeah.
adjustment for those districts.
yeah.
So it's,
But otherwise, the downside is that if you needed the funds in November right away, let's say you went in November and you wanted them to start in 24-25 right away and it didn't pass, you would have a budget that reflected the not having that revenue. Did I answer that?
You said exactly what I wanted.
Okay.
Good.
Okay.
good question. I think it is important. I just want to say one more thing, a little bit separate from this information. You know, at times we hear there's a narrative in our community that we've been fiscally irresponsible. That's why we're going through a budget reduction. We've been like David said, that's been the opposite of who we are. We've been one of the only districts out there that haven't gone to referendum because we have made those reductions. And if we are going to move to a referendum at some point, and if the narrative out there is that we've been fiscally irresponsible, I don't see that public would want to support a referendum if they've heard the narrative. And so I think we have a duty to make sure that we're providing accurate information about where we're at here.
The slide that maybe pushes the wrong word, but you're looking at that slide, you're seeing 4,000 students, 30, I wrote it down, 3445 come 28, 29.
Yep.
It's a lot of
Scary.
money. That's a lot of money lost to operate the same amount of schools, same amount of staff, same amount of support, everything.
Is that pretty consistent across the state?
Declining
Yeah.
SPE, yes.
I think the other slide to push is the map. I mean, with our state, like, how does that not scream to our state that districts need help? We need more funding. If this is the norm and you guys have a surplus right now, why? So that's just crazy.
You see, we created this slide this fall. Well, I mean, the left we've been updating, but we combined it together this fall. We've been seeing it all over now because it is.
Yep.
How do we get polling data of, whether we think this would be something the community would accept like ahead of time?
That's where the survey typically comes in.
When we were in the session at WASB, they talked with School Perceptions was a partner with them, and they're one company that does that work.
90% of, if they tell you it's gonna pass, over 90% of the time, it will pass. But if they tell you it's gonna fail, 90% of the time, it's gonna fail. So they have very solid work that and that's why we're having this discussion now. If this is something we look in November, it's work that has to begin now. They don't have to be able to drop it. Like Amy
They
said,
said we have to decide by June.
No, we have to make a resolution by August.
August 20.
But there's a lot of work before that if we were to consider, there's a lot of communication that has to happen in some of this data collection.
What was the June date then?
Yeah, that was if you were going in August.
Voted on.
Yeah. And Dave has all these slides and you're welcome to share out any and all of them. And the PDF I sent has everything included on it.
So we'll link it to our board agenda.
Is this a normal timeline to start? It just seems so coming so fast.
I would have preferred to start earlier.
Okay, because I feel like we are behind. If
think
you
we're-
considering this.
Well, we're behind because we never thought of it, we never wanted to do it,
Right.
but now we're in a pretty rough situation. So, and we're fighting that presidential election coming up this year. So
For operations, it's still, you aren't on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Right.
still,
I mean,
yeah, I mean, ideally, I would like to start a little earlier, like this presentation a little bit earlier, but we're good.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're,
I've been it's been collecting information, working with Debbie and Kev. So, hey, first thing, do I need to do this? Because me looking at this, we need to do this. Yeah, absolutely, you need to do this if you're going to sustain the same programming you have in your district. That's not the solution. Because you're cutting.
Thank you. It was very comprehensive. Yep.
that's probably more than.
Oh, that's right. You've got another one. You've got the
I
phases.
promise the next
Yep.
one's 2 pages instead. And then just to clarify, so School Perceptions we partnered with they aren't a partner of ours.
Right.
Yeah.
You partnered with them in the
Yep.
session.
Yes.
Yes.
Just clarify. Okay, so can I shift gears that suddenly? Okay. So on the 18th, you will, as a board, be asked to consider your cash defeasance. You might remember this from last year, but just like we prepay our home mortgages and we generate interest savings or we avoid paying interest on that mortgage or loan, school districts can do the same thing. And so last year, your process, you took 2 years of levy and prepaid, and you avoided over $2 million of interest over the life of the loan. This year, you have 2.5 million to prepay, and it's estimated to save about $1 million, 976,000 is the estimate in interest avoidance. So this is direct taxpayer savings. Common question I get is, well, we just talked about a budget deficit. Why can't we use this $1 million to address it? 2 separate buckets by statute. So what we're proposing tonight is, or building background on, is just the concept of it. It's likely familiar to you from last year, but what happens is with board approval, the dollars get wired into an escrow account and they generate interest. And then when the debt becomes truly callable or prepayable, the escrow agent makes the payment on your behalf. And the scenario we have for you that generates the 976,000 in savings estimated is prepaying. Are you able to zoom? Yes. You want the top part too? There, that's perfect. Good. So on the left-hand side, we have your before defeasances. So we're only including those issues that we're looking to address with a prepayment. And then on the right is what it would look like after the defeasance. So we're looking to pay off your $8.525 million issue from 2017, and then take the rest of your available funds and prepay the last maturity of your 2016 bonds. And so the reason why we chose maturity specifically, that when you pay the longer ones first, you save more. And these are the higher interest rate issues as well. So the hypothetical reduction in Fund 39 shows the annual savings. So you'll avoid $80,000 in interest each year if this is approved and carried forward. So we work with over 100 school districts that do this each year. Those that do it, it's because they have the ability to levy early and prepay. And it generates savings for years long term.
And like Debbie said, I can't use this for anything else. This is pure fund.
Yeah.
Referendum debt, you can't, and we have to move the money. We can't just hold on to the 2 million. It has to. So.
You run into arbitrage issues if
Yeah.
if you sit on it too long. The last thing I'll say is next year, this is that 2.5 million I mentioned. Next year, you may choose not to do this, and you could use this levy authority instead to apply to a potential operational referendum. So
We say we were asking for 4, but actually only needed 1.5 more, 1.5 more than what we've been doing, because we would cut this 2.5 off of that.
and we did not factor that into your forecast model right now because it's not board approved and wasn't even brought to you for discussion yet. So if approved, we'll make sure to get your model split and your levy and lowering will reflect.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, we might have.
Very informative.
Good, anytime.
You're only
Anytime.
2.5 hours away.
I am.
Yeah. We'll zoom in.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming up.
But
Thanks for coming up.
It is.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Thanks, Debbie.
Other informational item, Fund 10 revenue and expense update. Any thoughts, David?
Yeah, so if you want to click on either one of them, this is just purely coincidental, but if you scroll down to the bottom, some expenses. Yep, we have spent $29 million. Then if you go to revenue, we've gotten $29 million. Then we pay payroll the next day, and we're back in full.
Nice job, Dave.
I have two action items, gifts, grants, and bequests. The administration recommends approval to accept gifts, grants, and bequests received in the past month.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Second action item, annual donation to Scholarship Foundation. Administration recommends approval of the annual donation amount of $1,000 to the School District of Superior Scholarship Foundation Incorporated Student Activities Fund.
Motion to approve.
Second. Hearing a motion and a second.
Just,
Any discussion?
we do this each year, so we keep bringing this forward to you and they tell us not to. No.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. I have no discussion items. And that concludes my report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Board Member Olson. Next up is our Teaching and Learning Committee, Nick Schumacher.
All right, no action items, no discussion, information items, bar update for Superior High School and Superior Middle School. Kristen Regas and Mark Johnson, SMS and SHS bar coordinators. Welcome.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks. Up back to follows. Thanks for being. Back to follows. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, the joke, like, these follow that.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mark and I are going to talk to you a little bit about BAR. So BAR is a model that it really helps schools just talk about all kids, really deepen our discussions. We are strength-based, asset-based, talk about all the wonderful things, and then we really get into what makes each student unique and individual and how we can build on that and support them in school.
Can I give a little background, just really like 2 sentences? I was introduced to this program. It was out of St. Louis Park. They found success in some of the key aspects of BAR, like the I-time, the risk review team meetings, and the different structure that they put in place. And they were able to get a pretty large grant to be able to expand this to other school districts. And we were introduced to it about 6 years ago when we first received a grant to implement this. And we found success at the high school. And so now we're trying to replicate it at the middle school. So just a little bit of background.
The BAR model is really building relationships, staff to staff, staff to students, and students to students. And I really think that that has shown in the last few years at the middle school, just in the positive changes that have happened. The way staff support each other, the way kids are supporting each other. When Aaron was talking about attendance, that was one of the things that was brought up at our staff meeting when we shared the latest data on that kids are holding other kids accountable. Like, why weren't you at school? You need to be at school. Or, just checking in on them if they're homesick.
So the BAR model, Amy mentioned a few of them, the I-time curriculum. The ones that I kind of want to focus in on is the first strategy, the fifth one, and then the 8th one. So focusing on the whole student, we start our meetings. There's 3 meetings a week. Kind of fast forward a little bit, but we start with strength-based. So we're always talking about the student's strengths to start. And we focus on things just outside of the classroom, outside of the school, when we start talking about those students. Kristen and I help facilitate meetings. I feel like sometimes that's like all we do, but we get to do a lot of fun stuff too. We hold meetings with our staff twice a week, and then our community connections, it used to be called risk review, but now it's called community connections now, where we use strategies for our tier 3 or level 3 students at the community connections level. The part that I think staff enjoy the most, and the students love the I-time. They're like asking for it. If a teacher misses a week or they have something going on, they're like, hey, when do we get to do the I-time lessons? That's an SEL based curriculum. The curriculum is pre-made, it's ready to go. Staff have interactions with the kids. It's non-academic. They get to know each other a little bit better and they create that positive relationship. But with the strategy number 8, that engaging administrators, each week, at least once a week, administrators, teachers, counselors, our school psychologist, other staff are involved with talking about that whole. So everybody's at the table, everybody has a voice, and we're getting some of that immediate feedback on what works for student engagement, what works for student supports. And so it's a real key component of the bar. These are.
Yeah.
That we want.
That's awesome. You're,
I'm on the next one too. So, we talk a lot about with bar, it's the same teachers, same students, better results. This kind of highlights what that looks like. So teachers' attitudes and behaviors improve, student attitudes and behaviors improve. And ultimately the goal is those academic outcomes. Of course, we want them to be better citizens, engaged learners, all of those things. In the end, we're really looking for those increased graduation rates. The test scores are improving and they're saving some of those core credits. Amy mentioned in St. Louis Park, one of the reasons they started this program was because they noticed more than 50% of their ninth graders were ending ninth grade without the credits to graduate. We have improved drastically because of programs like this within our district.
We had data upon data that supported that as well in this district.
Absolutely.
We could forecast even as early as a sixth grade that they would be in jeopardy of graduating.
And with that now, it is a perfect transition to or segue to the next slide. We started this in 2018-19, and as Amy mentioned, it was grant funded the first 3 years. Myself and Jane Larson wrote a grant for the 4th year. I think we're in year 5 now at the high school. And so we have just tons of data when we start at 9th grade. By the time they get into 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, those teachers aren't having to reinvent the wheel for student intervention and supports. We already kind of know what works, or in some cases, what doesn't work for student engagement and supports. So we're able to pass that information along pretty easily to the next year's teachers as we go along. We do just the 9th grade cohorted classes. So each student has a core class subject area that are the same. So math, science, history, and English. You're on team 1, team 2, and team 3, respectively. And so it's harder to do that at the 10th through 12th grade level because there's so much variance in their classes and so much changes in where they can go, which is great. But we do run our community connections at the 10th through 12th grade level as well. So our most at-risk students, our most students that need the most support, have that tier 3 level support as well. So we've implemented that model really school-wide. And now we'll have even more data because we're doing it at the middle school as well.
so last year was our first year at the middle school. And so we decided just to start small, 6th grade only. I was new to bar and it was my first year at the middle school. So just kind of dip our toes in. And it was amazing. The teachers were phenomenal. They really got to know all of their kids on a personal level, know what their strengths are. The feedback I received from the teachers last year and the students was great. So we decided school-wide. I thought that might be a challenge for me. I love a challenge, but I mean like hard, like how am I going to do this school-wide? There's 9 teams of teachers then. So that's 18 meetings a week for me, plus the Community Connect. And it's been great. I've got to know the teachers on a personal level. I know kids within the school that I don't see every day because we're talking about kids and we're talking positively and strengths. And when there's supports we need to put in place, we're a team. We're working together to support one child. We focus on one child at a time. So I could talk a lot, but I need to keep.
One thing that I'll mention, channel, Mr. Olson, I'll appreciate this. I'll channel my inner Bill Punko for this next part. But we've been teaming at the high school level since about 2002. And so we've been doing this exact same model. But what BAR does and what BAR has done for us is given us a vehicle to ride in through that teaming system. And it's a research-based approach. And we have the best part and the hardest part, I guess, for me, is that it's timed. Each time we start talking about a student at the team levels, we're limiting ourselves to 5 minutes because oftentimes you can get distracted on things that don't really matter when you're talking about students. You know, okay, they were a distraction in your class. Yep, in my class. Okay, let's try and find the root cause. Let's try to find the supports that we need, because we're limited to an hour discussion for these students. And so we want to get through as many students as we can within those discussions. And this gives us a great model to talk about the most students possible within a short amount of time.
And my other thing that I love about the teaming is it's not just one teacher trying to problem solve about one student or provide accelerated supports for one student. It's a team that has taken on that one student and they're just collaborating. So it's been great. So these are some things when I had surveyed the middle school teachers for part of my portfolio or whatever. Just some positive things that they said. I'll read one. Having a dedicated time for bar meetings has been a positive asset at SMS. It has helped in more effectively meeting the needs of all students. And I love that staff member said all students. So there's lots of others. And if you have access to these, you can read them or just reach out to me. Mark already touched on iTime. iTime happens once a week. It happens in core classes. So once a week on a rotating basis. So like this week, the ELA teachers at the middle school are facilitating iTime. In sixth grade, their iTime lesson this week is called Golden Nuggets. And what they're doing is each child gets a rock. They get put in small groups, they each get a rock. They have to decide the value of their rock just from what they can see on the outside. And then discuss how they ordered it, why they put it in the order that they did. And then the teacher throws in, well, what if I tell you there's gold on the inside? Does that change how you order them? Does that put any difference in it? And the lesson is around, don't just look on what's the outside. We have to dig deeper, what the inside of everyone is and what they can bring to the table. Super excited about 6th and 7th grade this week. Their iTime is called Lollipop Moments. And all the teachers got a bin of lollipops from me and envelopes, and the students, they're writing a letter to someone who was their lollipop. So someone who made a difference to them. And that person might not have realized that. For an example, I put Miss Saunders wrote me a lollipop moment letter 2 years ago. And I put that example in the slideshow so the kids could see one.
That's the nice part about the iTime lessons. It's very interactive with the students and staff. And so they do whatever activity as well. And so they can kind of see their teacher in a different light and get to know them a little bit better.
So 1 week it's ELA, the next
sorry,
week it's
yeah.
social studies,
Yep.
next week it's science. So kids get it every week, but it only impacts the teacher once a month,
Yeah.
right?
So they lose one curriculum once a month.
And Crystal says, okay.
Yeah. So then, what students say about iTime, here's just some feedback from the students from a survey I had done. I like that we get a break from academics and we get to talk about friendships and feelings. I copied the students. It's not my grammatical errors. I copied their feedback. And then part of the BAR model is we get coaching support from someone that works within BAR. And so last year at the middle school, I had 4 coach visits. And each visit, they send a report, and the report just kind of talks about what they see, what their noticings are, wonderings, and then they'll do next steps for us. So I just plopped the one in from the end of last year, so our 4th report. And then from this year, we have 3 visits. So we had one in October, and then she was just here in February, and then she'll come again in April.
It's a nice external look at how we're doing.
Yeah.
And they have a rubric that they use to
Yep.
kind of determine where we're at in the process. I think I'll use the top right quote, and this is from Mr. Hagelin Pagel, and I'm doing that for maybe more than one reason tonight. But he said, we do more now to make less work later. And so at the freshman level, we can often see and predict, like Mr. Olson was saying, where their career is going to end if they don't start out on the right foot in ninth grade. And so we do a little bit more work with our ninth grade students, and we have in the long run a little bit less work later. Here's our coaching report. One of the areas that we've tended to struggle with in the past, I should say, let's start with strengths, right? We'll use the bar model. Let's start with strengths. You can see that we're in place in each one of the areas. Those areas typically reflect the core model or 8 core pillars for bar. In the past, we've kind of struggled with that family engagement piece, as I think district-wide, we've seen that. So having the family engagement coordinator at the high school has really helped our overall support there. And then last slide, Kristen was going to kick me if I was talking too long, so I think we've been doing an okay job, or at least I'm out of foot range here. This is our most recent data that everybody I think here is seeing. And it's not just the bar program, of course, it's a lot of different factors, but I think ultimately this is where we're focused on is this graduation rate. It's dramatically improved due to a lot of work across the district, but.
And that's one of the reasons we were approved for the grant 5 years ago, is because our data reflected the need for an intervention.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've seen on the 2 different graphs for the middle school versus the high school, there was a community connect meeting.
Yep.
This is not having one there.
Yep, so Community Connect is once a week. So you'll notice, whoops, sorry, on this one, and I don't know why, I didn't deliberately not have that on there, but on the October 26th report, there won't be anything there either. That means the bar coach didn't observe Community Connect.
Oh, she just showed up on a day that they weren't doing it. Okay.
Yeah, so we do ours every Wednesday at the middle school at 7:55. And so that's why there's nothing there. It was unobservable. When she comes in April, she's coming on a Wednesday.
Okay.
And it's one of those meetings where you can't really switch. We have the school psychs, all the counselors, like everyone in the APs and all admin. It's hard to reschedule a meeting to accommodate that when there's so many other things. But Community Connect, sorry, I know, sorry, you should kick me now. That's where we really talk about, we say level 3, but it's our students with mental health crisis, truancy, maybe homelessness, any kind of trauma they might be experiencing. Like, what supports can we provide that the community has? Maybe we need to get the family in touch with some things.
And the part from the teacher's perspective that they really enjoy about the tier 3 supports or that Community Connect support is that it takes those students that you're having the most challenges with within your classroom and takes those off the table and off of their plate and say, listen, we'll come up with some supports, interventions, bring them back to you at our next meeting and come up with some ideas and generate some ideas outside this meeting time. So, because we don't want to take up all of the meeting, but the students that are creating or most challenges and most difficulties. So it gives us time to find those kids that might normally fall through the cracks. So those kids that, maybe it's the quiet kid in the back that's sitting with their head down that you might not notice every day. Or some of those students that have some smaller challenges, we call them sometimes the low hanging fruit. Like, hey, they're failing a class. If we could just get them, like pull them out of like 15 minutes of this class, we can get them caught up in passing in no time. And so it really gives more time back to the teachers by taking some of those students and discussing that in a different setting and with some folks that are really knowledgeable, not only about school systems, but the community systems as well.
I love it. Awesome.
Is there any aspect to this of students supporting students or encouraging that mentorships, or it's a
lot of times
teachers supporting students having other?
Yeah. So a lot of times when we run interventions, just like with other things, is hey, who are their connections to the school, right? So a lot of times it's the peer group that's their connections. Well, I know so-and-so, we talk about seating arrangements all the time. And so, hey, they do really well sitting next to Amy in this class. Maybe I'll switch them in my class and sit them next to Amy too, so they can help them there too. Or, hey, has anybody talked to so-and-so yet? No, but I know they hang out with, they hang out with Ed at lunchtime. maybe at lunchtime, I'll go over to Ed's table and see if they've heard from, from Nick in the last couple of days. So we do utilize those peer-to-peer supports as we can.
One of the things it's a personal goal of mine is to have like peer ambassadors or student ambassadors. To kind of help with those connections a little more, or maybe we have a new student starting. Say we have a new student and that student ambassador is kind of their guide and support. We have our 8th grade leaders. We could utilize them more too in that aspect, I think. Anything else for us?
Do you find that some of your tools and techniques that you're using translate into just working with general population or mitigating issues sooner?
Eric,
Just by, yeah, well,
Yeah, I like today, for example, last week I was working with the team and struggling with a student with some behaviors that are increasing, and the parent hadn't signed up for conferences. So I'm like, well, let's use small block on Monday, see if they can come in. And we had a parent meeting, all of us there, the core teachers there, the AP came, the counselor, and it was a great meeting. And instead of 10 minutes, we were together for 40 minutes. So,
We utilize that at the high school too, or, maybe it's time for a parent meeting. Let's get them in and we can have it during the time that everybody shares that common planning time. So we don't have to struggle to find times on a calendar to get everybody together. It's already there, ready to go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, our next committee, Personnel Negotiations Committee. Brooke.
All right. I have several action items. The first, administration recommends approval of the March 2024 new hires and separations report.
Motion approved.
second.
A motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
One misspelling in there, so I'll fix that for next week.
Okay.
The Najman Baczynski, it needs an H instead of a K.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Administration recommends releasing Tate Haglin Pagel, Assistant Principal from SHS, from his 23-24 school year contract per his request, effective March 6, 2024, with the liquidated damages provision in force.
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Holly, can you just explain in general terms why some have recommendations for waived and why, just how it's connected to the handbook?
Yep, so we have the language in the handbook for certain reasons, the liquidated damages would be waived. And that would be medical, other issues, like spouse revocation issues. So those are all listed in the handbook. If it wasn't a reason that's listed in there, then we ask for the liquidated damages to be enforced.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Administration recommends releasing Emily Winker, project search teacher from SHS, from her 23-24 school year contract per her request, effective March 8th, 2024, with the liquidated damages provision enforced.
Move to approve.
Okay.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Administration recommends releasing Terry Thatcher, special education teacher from Bryant, from her 23-24 school year contract per her request, effective February 27th, 2024, with the liquidated damages provisions waived.
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Administration recommends approval of the updated job description for the following positions in the teacher category: special education coach.
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Dina, do you want to just give some background on this?
This
position, along with myself, as a coach, which is a position that's the district has had in the past. Primarily, this person will be out in buildings working with IEP teams, say, support for students with significant behavior challenges. It was updated slightly the last time that it was used.
We tried to, I think, incorporate the behavior support that teams are asking for, as well as the due process support for teachers, just how to support IEPs and evaluation writing, right?
Just the description of the job updated, not pay scale or anything else.
To be part of the teacher pay scale.
Has it always been there?
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. I have no discussion items, no informational items, so that ends my report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Legislative Committee led by Diana Smith.
I have no action items, no discussion items, and one informational item. OSS ask your senators to support continued OSS funding, digital mapping, data grants available from an OSS release. As many of you are aware, recent progress has been made to ensure the Wisconsin Office of School Safety is able to continue critical operations to keep our schools safe. 2023 Assembly Bill 1050, which supports the continued operations of OSS through September 2025, recently passed the Assembly. This funding extension would allow us to continue our work to proactively protect schools, prevent violence from occurring, mitigate trauma, and respond effectively if a crisis event does occur to promote recovery. The continued funding would also provide predictable school safety services to all Wisconsin schools. While it will still be critical for the legislator to provide stable ongoing funding for the Office of School Safety as part of the 2025-2027 biennial budget, 2023 Assembly Bill 1050 offers an important bridge to enable continued services until deliberations on the state budget begin in 2025. And there's an article attached with more information.
We wrote letters.
We've written letters. This department has been a significant resource to our school district. They currently fund the Speak Up, Speak Out app, which we use on a daily basis to keep our schools safe. They also have helped us with threat assessment training and other safety protocols. So they've been a huge resource to us, and we want to, school safety is our number one priority. And so we continue to advocate that this stays in place. I just want to also mention that the digital mapping grant, we already received that. And so we're working with the police department to implement that digital mapping software for our schools. So
that concludes my report.
And that concludes our meeting. A reminder, our next regular meeting is Monday, March 18th. We will be in a closed session beginning at 4:30 p.m. We do hope to reconvene by 6 p.m. Thank you very much for being here. Good evening.
Yeah.